first of all, thanks everybody for hanging in there on a rainy day. It's been kind of wet and slimy out there. I did think I saw a couple of snowflakes, but I'm not gonna profess that that's true. So why don't you both take a minute, if you don't mind, Ian, introduce yourself, and then we'll introduce Colin, and then let's get into the meat of things.
Thank you. So first, a quick thank you to Matt and all the other organizers for inviting me out. I came in from West Michigan. My name's Ian Northon. I'm a trial attorney by training, but I've been in Bitcoin now full-time for about 3 years. I started a Bitcoin mining pool with a couple of other guys, really talented guys, called Ocean. And so we focus on transparency, decentralization, and permissionlessness. And we do that by being a non-custodial pool. So there's some legal fireworks behind that, but we basically try to help Bitcoin miners mine more efficiently, make more money, and do so in kind of a sovereign and permissionless way.
Well, I'm Colin Crossman. In my day job, I'm the director of the business division for the Wyoming Secretary of State. I, however, have been in Bitcoin for a little while. Got into mining in 2011. Then I bought a motorcycle. I don't have any of it. And came back to it in 2019, 2020, moved out to Wyoming during COVID, and now I'm here. My wife and I have a small Bitcoin mine, as I discussed earlier today, as well as I write for Bitcoin Magazine.
Well, first question I have, let me start out with you, Colin, is who's your favorite Bitcoiner and why is it Caitlin Long? Sorry, I'm joking, of course. Well, I mean, I do want to preface just for a second. Many of you know this story because I've told it a million times. Everything that's really happened here in Wyoming really stems from Caitlin trying to make a gift in 2016 to the University of Wyoming. Her dad was an engineering professor here for 40 years, and she wanted to endow a scholarship for female engineers, and ran smack dab into a poorly written money transmitter law, which we're going to talk a little bit about, because money transmitter laws, as Ian will tell you, are different in a state level than a federal level. And Wyoming kind of got caught in that. And the University of Wyoming, because exchanges wouldn't operate in Wyoming, the University of Wyoming Foundation couldn't accept Bitcoin. And for those of you who know Caitlin, and many of you do, know she's not the kind of woman that says, oh, no problem, we'll handle it a different way. She's like, no, we're going to change this. And so for the last 7, pushing on 8 years now, we've passed 56 enabling pieces of legislation. And I use that word enabling because none of our legislation says you can't. They all say you can. And so that's really what established Wyoming, I think, as the state leader. So let me point my first question to Ian. Ian, talk about the challenges from a regulatory standpoint and how they differ from a state viewpoint to a federal viewpoint.
All right, so I'll take that small question and see if I can. You don't need an elephant in one bite, right? You take one bite at a time. So I spent most of my career as a lawyer, not as a regulatory lawyer, but as a trial attorney. So it was an adversarial mindset. And so that's, for good or bad, I look at every regulation with that kind of jaundiced eye, and I take kind of an adversarial mindset toward it, which I found fits pretty well with Bitcoiners, right? Like we tend to be a bit standoffish. I'm actually a really friendly guy. I'm a small town guy. Please say hello, even if I'm scowling all the time because I'm reading an email from some regulator, right? But when we launched Ocean at the end of 2023, we had, as we're trying to plan and do things in a particular way, we wanted to get mining back to the old way of doing things, which was transparent, permissionless, and so forth. And all of the trend in the last 10 years before that had been toward large, centralized custodial models. Well, if you're a custodian of someone else's Bitcoin, inevitably that made you a money transmitter at the federal level. There were some instances in which some states tried to develop, the laboratory of states and have different views, but the federal view really dominated that space, and it's been that way really since even before 9/11, but certainly since then, with the trends toward surveillance and AML and KYC. That's been the trend. So the approach we took is, well, we wanted to be non-custodial because that's better for the Bitcoiners, but we also wanted to do it so that we could avoid those very regulations. And so we had to take very structural approaches all the way down to the coding level to make sure that we didn't inadvertently step into a set of regulations that we knew we either didn't want to comply with or couldn't satisfy our goals and ethos as a company and still do that. So we took a non-custodial approach, and that's the only thing, you talk about positive or negative rights, that's the only thing that allowed us to operate the way we did when we launched, and we've maintained that. But when you look at it at the federal level, both here in the US and then in other jurisdictions, federal United States law tends to dominate when it comes to money transmission. And I remember I was in Switzerland in 2016 and talking with a lot of bankers and different folks, and the change from 500-600 years of Swiss secrecy and bank secrecy had been absolutely gutted and eviscerated during the Obama administration. They were shaking down. There's a story, I was in Florida at the time, where a Swiss banker came to visit Disney World with his family, and they didn't jam him up at the airport. They separated him from his family. He went home on his flight, and they all but kidnapped his wife and children and said, we've been warning you, if you don't comply, we're coming for you next. I mean, this type of coercion, these kind of threats, and all of the small Swiss bankers, these 200-year-old, 400-year-old family banks with literally the person's last name on the wall, were selling left, right, center. I remember I met with the general counsel at UBS, and they spent over $1 billion testing and doing war games and hiring lawyers to try to see whether or not they could comply. That's $1 billion out of their treasury to see whether or not they could fight it and it would be worth fighting. And as we know, they and everyone else decided not to. They got with the program because of that coercion. And so if you don't keep an eye toward those things, if you don't have that adversarial mindset and you just say, oh, I'll get along, right? We can lobby somebody, or we could do this or do that. You have to remember that the only way you can really navigate with freedom is to starve the people with the coercive ability. And so, looking at this from a limited government standpoint, I think Bitcoin is obviously a good trend, right? It starves the government from the ability to continue to print and do all this harm. And then we're like, oh, great, now the U.S. government's getting into Bitcoin, and people can debate or differ on whether that's a good or a bad thing. I tend to think it's generally a good thing, but you have to understand those kind of core principles and get back to basics always. And it's like, why do we need another bill? Is it enabling? Is it to help people? Or is it really just another tool in the coercion toolkit? So I take a very jaundiced view toward any piece of legislation or regulation, and then, like with the IRS, who I've sued a few times on behalf of clients, I say, every penny owed, but not a penny more. These are classic principles, right? So you have to understand the jurisdiction you're in, whether it's a state or federal level, and then navigate the best you can within those structures.
Okay, Colin, let me switch over to you because your perspective comes from a little different place. You are a regulator, and you have, I don't know if you would characterize it the same way I will. You've got a couple of mandates. One of them is certainly to help Wyoming grow and thrive economically, but you also have responsibilities in things like consumer protection and making sure. How would your office deal with those same challenges that Ian has just described?
So a lot of things are in tension when you're a regulator, right? And so also, I'm saying this, understand, I've only been a regulator now for 2.5 years. Like I was private sector. I owned my own business, several of them, and moved to Wyoming and got hired by the Secretary of State's office to the business division. So my official portfolio is over the all of the corporate formations of the state of Wyoming. There's a securities division, elections division. That's all in the Secretary of State's office. I don't officially have any dealings with those, although we all work together because there's only 4 of us. But there's always a tension. For instance, Wyoming has a unique aspect in that we have very strong privacy laws with respect to LLCs. I was talking to somebody earlier about that, saying, some people think this is a bug. In my opinion, it's a feature. Yes, it does cause some problems, just like freedom of speech causes problems. People use it in ways that we would prefer they don't, but it's better to have it. Same with the privacy. I think, and I think that the policy of the state of Wyoming is that it's better to have the privacy protections than not, because your neighbor doesn't need to know that you own a rental property, right? So that tension is always there, and it doesn't matter if you're in Wyoming or you're in North Carolina or you're in Delaware. That tension is always there. Each state has just sliced it a little bit differently, but the way I see it is to support the business community in the state of Wyoming is try to protect what we have. So when the federal government came down with this thing called the Corporate Transparency Act, which was intended to effectively annihilate any concept of privacy in the corporate area, my office fought it by filing an amicus brief in the Supreme Court against it. Now, we lost that particular case, which was a very technical component, but we ended up mostly winning when Trump got elected and removed the domestic application of the Corporate Transparency Act, and the 2 other cases are still pending. But by and large, it's you take the ground as it is, you see where things are going to break, and you try to address those while maintaining the things that are good.
And if I could offer, I mean, you asked me about federal versus state. When we formed the company, we chose Wyoming for that reason. It gave us, in a sense, one less thing to worry about. It was more predictable. I mean, businesses want predictability. It did have some things built in that at least understood generally what Bitcoin was and knew it wasn't a threat. There are differences between states, just as there's differences between countries. And you have to, in many ways, vote with your feet, right? And so I think that's so important. For young people here at the university, but others, if you're a business owner, you have to be prepared to do those hard things. And you always have to, was it Brad, Professor Ritter earlier was talking about critical thinking, right? You have to engage in critical thinking on yourself, and that's really hard. So you have to be able to get that advice where you need it and so forth. But I would also suggest that when you go into these different arenas, don't give up that adversarial mindset. Don't be too quick just to roll over. Don't take things for granted, because Wyoming is one of the few places that gives those mandates to its people. Most states don't. They've kind of, was it Fozzie who jumped the shark? Like it's gone, right? Like it's not coming back in most places. Delaware used to be the home for corporations to go, and then they let in a floodgate of ridiculous litigation by shareholders, these strike suits that is, people are now voting with their feet and no longer forming in Delaware. So you just have to, when you're trying to navigate, you have to do that, and I think it's so important. I would also add that my default position is, well, is there already something on the books, so to speak, that's sufficient? So, for example, when you move into a new space like technology or AI or Bitcoin, our common law system, which we inherited whole cloth from the British, is a pretty good system. It moves slowly, it acts through precedent. Like, I didn't need a special Bitcoin fraud law in order to deal with fraud in Bitcoin. Fraud is fraud. You can smell it a mile away. Like, you don't need a regulation to add or layer on top of that, because that creates, winners and losers there a little bit. Instead, just use the common law tradition where you can. And I think the more active or more freedom-seeking the people are, then the less likely the government, nature abhors that vacuum. Power abhors that vacuum. So The government will fill in the vacuum if people aren't filling it in themselves and trying to exercise and navigate in an aggressive and sovereign way.
Well, let me ask you a follow-up to that. You know, I've been in this space since probably 2013. And, you know, I've felt that for a vast majority of that time, we've been pushing a rock uphill. And being the tip of the spear, are you sensing a sea change that will allow our industry to really begin to flourish today, where it's felt to me that we've been held back previously? Are you feeling a difference?
I would say yes. I think you can feel it. Like there is a difference. You know, when we launched under the prior administration, it had been several years where we thought, you know, you're just kind of waiting for the next thing to drop, right? The Justice Department was looking to make examples out of people. You know, they can't prosecute everybody, but they can you know, prosecute a few and scare people. Now, I said, look, let's not put a target on our back by doing things the wrong way. Let's button it up. Let's do it the right way from the start. But, you know, with the new administration, I think there is a sense that, you know, whether they get enthusiastic about scam coins or other things, like I just want to be left alone in some ways. And I do think that's been the shift, right? Like the shift is like, you know what? Let's see where this goes. And I'm seeing a temptation to kind of wait and see, which is actually, I think, the best thing. One temptation is always, here I'm talking about being aggressive and asserting your rights and all these things, but the one thing that's a decision is sometimes it's best to do nothing. And for individuals, that's rarely the right decision, but sometimes it is. But for governments, it's almost always the right decision, is to do little or do nothing and just wait and see where an emerging technology or see where something will go. I don't think anyone, when the IRS was writing its first comments on Bitcoin back in 2014, I don't think it even contemplated the fact that public corporations would be making energy arbitrage plays to acquire Bitcoin, right? You know, they were thinking about, you know, it's like in another investment, you know, capital gains, why not? Like it seems analogous to that. And they did not do a good job of anticipating those things. So again, that's to me where if they had done less or little, you know, by moving slow, I think that is a good opportunity. And again, I encourage governments to move slow and people to move fast.
And I think one of the biggest risks that we have with this massive shift from the previous administration to this administration is an overcorrection. And we go from everything is verboten, we're going to tax the crap out of you, we're going to debank you, we're going to do all these things, to let's do whatever we want. And at this, you know, like as you said, government should move slowly. One of the downsides of going from massively overregulated to potentially significantly underregulated is you're going to get that reverse again, and because people will get squished in both sides, and so you know there'll be this tit for tat and you know, repeated game moving forward.
Well, let me follow up on what you just said, because you know, it is interesting that we have seen some model legislation federally that we've never seen before. We had the Genius Act come through beginning of the year, which primarily dealt with stablecoins, and that was signed into law. And now we have two competing pieces of legislation going through Congress. The Clarity Act, which passed the House, which the Senate has said we have no intention of passing, and they've come up with their own RFIA, I believe they're referring to it. Have they taken the right approaches? You know, is in both of your opinions, we need something balanced. Have they accomplished that, or are they attempting to accomplish that?
I think they're attempting it. I think when you're talking about the two pieces of legislation, or well, 2.5, 3, the Genius Act, with some caveats, is a strict improvement over what we had. I mean, it helps out. It could have helped Wyoming a little more, but overall, I think it's an improvement over the. It's not necessarily and this is something I had to learn myself, it's a lack of regulation is not necessarily good, because as Ian had said, you have all of these defaults in the common law, and sometimes those defaults run counter to what actually you want to happen. And so there is a case for positive regulation. That doesn't mean regulation telling you not to do something, but actually enabling you to do something, or rewriting the common law in such a way to make something viable. And I think that's what these pieces of legislation are attempting to do, and that's positive. Whether or not they will accomplish that is another thing entirely, but I think from what I've heard, the RFIA is actually a potentially a better choice than Clarity, specifically because it includes protections for open source operators that Clarity does not include. And we wanted to make sure, one of the things that people have to worry about on the federal level is the rogue prosecutor. And I say that as, it's not really a rogue when they're just doing their job and they're saying, well, my job here is to figure out how to get you, and I'm going to come up with all of these ways. It's almost a freaking law school hypothetical where you've done these things, I can tack this law and this law and this law and get you with it. Well, that's what, without something like that, that's what they're going to do.
You want to expand on that?
No, I think that there's truth to that, right? Like, in other words, human corruption finds its way into every, whether it's individual businesses, individuals, homes, but it also finds its ways into all three branches of government. And so, creating a regulatory or a legislative framework to try and carve out space in which people can operate with some confidence is good, because there has been, as that pendulum swings, under prosecution for decades of certain types of things, and now over prosecution. And you don't want the hardest and strongest levers that the government can pull, threatening your freedom by locking you in jail or fining you or doing these other things, to be the types of things that become political footballs, right? You want those to be the most value neutral, the things that, there is consensus and everyone can agree that it's wrong to steal from people or whatever, or wrong to defraud people in a certain way. But if you don't do that carefully, then you're, again, just saying, all right, well, my tribe won, and so we're gonna do it, and then we're gonna prosecute our political opponents and try to punish them. And so you have to find ways. I like to see the regulation sort and root out base corruption, because that's the thing that individuals have a hard time doing on their own. That's where government protection can kind of create an envelope or an umbrella to block the rain, that comes down, so that its citizens can operate underneath with some freedom. And so to me, that's where I'd like to see the focus of some of these things. The details of both of those bills, they keep changing a little bit, so I don't want to opine too strongly one way or the other. But I would give an example. Folks like to talk about the federal government maybe doing a treasury bill right now. And for the longest time, people in the government would find themselves with Bitcoin, and they really didn't know where it fit. And so they would, GSA would do an auction, because that's what the marshals do when they seize property. They would have an auction. And I'd like to see something like, allow the government to have the confidence to say, maybe we can just hang on to this. Maybe it would be good for our people if we just hang on to it and use it in some other way. But you've got to create some protection for those cogs of either individual actors either trying to do business with the government, or the government agents themselves, that they can have, we can hang on to this. Even if you don't go so far as to decide what to do with it, at least create some space so that it can operate. I'd like to see that in other areas as well, especially around custody, custody touches so many different things, whether it's pension funds or banks. And, getting back to the basics of, well, what's the goal? It's to protect people who have a hard time defending against counterparty risk of somebody running off with their Bitcoin, or running off with their money or their gold, or fill in the blank. So I think there's, Bitcoin in that sense is not new. It's better than what we've seen in the past, but it's not new. And so we don't have to, we can, it's anti-biblical for me to say this, but like, you can put new wine in old wineskins here. Like, you can use the models that we use in other spots, and don't overcomplicate it. Keep it simple, because I think that creates a space to operate.
Let me ask, and I apologize to my students, because I ask this question all the time of them, so I'm going to put you guys in the hot seat a little bit. I'm going to start out, Colin, and hand you a magic wand, okay? You get to create two pivotal pieces of legislation that will change our world. What are they?
No more Federal Reserve. Oh, okay. And words mean what they say. I don't. How about
Keep it a Bitcoin.
no
money.
tax on Bitcoin?
No tax.
It's
on
a
Bitcoin.
currency. You don't tax the dollar. You don't tax it.
All right, Ian, you are the tip of the spear legally. What would you fix?
Those are two good ones. I like those. But I would actually, I would say, rather than add something, I would take something away. So I would go back to, I was in law school when the towers hit in New York City. And so I would say some of the mischief, it was well-intended, some of it, maybe some of it wasn't well-intended, but I would say the so-called assaults on privacy have spilled over into every area of life, whether it's home ownership or money or other things. So I would just systematically repeal the so-called Patriot Act and all of the things that spin out of it. I think privacy is important. That doesn't mean, like, look, the Bitcoin network is an open ledger. It's literally more transparent than any other thing when we look at it from a financial perspective. So I'm not talking about a lack of transparency. I'm talking about privacy where it's needed. And I think surrounding individuals, companies, and money in particular, more privacy is needed. So I would start by dismantling that. And then I'd like to see my team, our code, when we launched a product called Datum, which allows miners to make their own templates. It helps decentralize the network. It allows them to take the payments directly from the Bitcoin network. That's a feature, not a bug. That's something the network always allowed to do. It doesn't have to go into a custodial pool. That's open source technology. We open source that. And I'd hate to have to hire the criminal defense lawyers to defend my coders or me personally, because we've created something that's open source and can be used for good when it's used the right way. Is there the possibility that somebody nefarious uses it for something untoward? Sure, but use the other tools in your toolkit to attack that rather than just attack all open source developers. And so I'd like to see some additional protections for open source developers.
Good answer. By the way, we did that in Wyoming. And
I'm not worried about the county prosecutor in Wyoming. But.
Well, we have two of the smartest people I know up here. I'm willing to take a couple of questions. Let's start here and then question over there.
I think it's RFIA. Yeah.
RFIA, yeah.
Not Samurai, because they pled. Yeah, so Samurai gave up and they pled, so they're stuck with it. With Tornado Cash, potentially, did he win or no? I think it will affect him if he's still, the case is still active.
Yeah, his criminal case is still pending, and there's been some motion practice and other things, but his is still his neck is still on the chopping block, so to speak. So it could, in theory, help him retroactively.
Well, yeah, I mean, the theory that both of those cases proceeded under was that effectively that they were that they had some control over it when they created the code, and therefore that was the criminal act. That they didn't, that by not exercising control to prevent these things, they became a criminal for that reason. And if you put those protections in place, if the RFIA's protections are indeed what I have believe they are or stay that way, then though that would prevent that kind of attack in the future, unless and until it got renegotiated.
incorporated your Michigan-based trial lawyer, and you incorporated Ocean in Wyoming. How did Wyoming's innovative, activities get your attention? How are you aware in this research?
Well, a couple of things. One, historically, I mean, Wyoming has been a safe haven for companies for decades. They invented the LLC, for example, and I've litigated a lot of trusts. I don't have a lot of trusts, but I've litigated them over the years, and Wyoming is friendly to trust and custody and those kind of concepts. So I thought, in that sense, broadly, it would be a good spot, but more pointedly, there are enabling acts here in Wyoming that talk about Bitcoin, what kind of property it is, understanding that it's a thing that can be protected. And so our company, the way the pool works just broadly is, Bitcoin miners from all over the world use us, and then we charge a fee based on what the blocks that are found. And so our revenue is denominated in Bitcoin. And so, if we have to convert that to, pay bills or something in fiat, I didn't want the drama of a particular jurisdiction changing to the wind and trying to call it something that it wasn't, because I knew that as we brought in Bitcoin, I would need to go in and out of fiat for just operations. And so that was the main driver. We formed a corporation, so we're not secret. I filed a Reg D when we raised some money that's filed at the federal level. So we're not secret. I'm not taking advantage of some of the privacy protections of the LLC and different things. We wanted to come here because Wyoming, more than any other state, in my opinion, knew what Bitcoin was and did not show any signs of changing anytime soon. And so sometimes you have to put your finger to the wind. I'm from Michigan, and I live there now, but I'm licensed in Pennsylvania. I'm licensed in Florida. I've litigated kind of all over, there are some jurisdictions that were actively and still are hostile to Bitcoin. Wyoming rolled out the red carpet. They were friendly to Bitcoin. So again, you vote with your feet. You go where you're wanted sometimes.
One other thing to think about here is that, and this potentially comes to play for the pool, but also anybody who's got an entity here that's holding Bitcoin. I don't know if any other state has this, but in Wyoming, you can't be compelled to release your private keys. So that's a state law. So if you are in a criminal or civil litigation and they try to subpoena your private keys, no, you don't have to do it.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much.